lecture, we learned about recovery, a time away from work to really relax. I'd like to invite you to join a traditional and time-tested recovery period, Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath. This Friday night, Harvard Hill and Chabad at Harvard invite you and your friends to Shabbat dinner at the Mac for Shabbat 1000. Come for a free dinner at the decked-out Mac with all of your friends, where our very own Professor Talben Shahar will be speaking. Doors open at 6:30 and dinner starts at 7. Please RSVP for this really fun event at Shabbat1000.org. Everyone is invited, so please sign up.
Hi, good morning. I was also asked to announce on behalf of the women's softball team. They would have been here and they would have announced it themselves, but they're at a game that was delayed. There's a game this Sunday and Saturday and Sunday, and also for the men's baseball team. So come out and cheer. And one more announcement. They can't hear. Sorry? Yeah? Yeah?
So I just want to we have the date for the final with the question grade and so, but it's going to be
all right, so May 21st, 9:15, date for the final. Hope you can make it. Okay. It's a Monday. All right, so every year when I teach the perfectionism lecture, something happens. So the first year I remember I actually forgot my computer at home. Second time, the projector didn't work. And this year I forgot my power for the computer at home, so hopefully it will last the entire semester. If not, we'll just have to deal with an imperfect scenario. But that's okay. I think it must be something subconscious, because it's too much of a coincidence that every time something happens. Walk the talk. So where were we last time? Last time we talked about how you learned how to walk. We learned about how you learned how to draw circles. And all through failure. As Thomas Edison said, I failed my way to success. And we saw it with top athletes, whether it was Babe Ruth or Michael Jordan. We saw it with top business people, whether it was Thomas Watson, IBM, or Anita Roddick, founder of the Body Shop. We see it with artists and scientists. The most successful ones are also the ones who failed the most. And these are the ones who understand the value and the importance of failure. I guarantee you that none of them enjoy failing. Failing hurts. It's disappointing at best. It's frustrating. It's embarrassing often. However, people who ultimately succeed recognize the value of failure and learning from it. There's a wonderful book that came out recently by one of my mentors. He taught at the business school for a few years. He's a professor at the University of Southern California, Warren Bennis. And Warren Bennis wrote a book which he called Geeks and Geezers. And in the book, he compared very successful leaders who were young, early 30s, and older generation leaders, people who've really made it. Big-time leaders who are now in their 70s, 80s, sometimes 90s. And he compared these two groups, the geeks, the young ones, the geezers, the older ones. And what he found was that there were a number of very interesting and meaningful differences between the generations of, again, highly successful late 20s or early 30-year-olds and highly successful older individuals. One of the most notable differences was that work-life balance, which was very important for the late 20s, early 30s. Very important. They talked about it constantly, whereas for the 70, 80, 90-year-olds, it was almost a foreign concept. Work, what does that even mean? Why? Because they were at work usually 24/7. All of them in that sample were men, and the women were at home taking care of the life part. So there was a work-life balance where they were doing the work, the wife was doing the life. Whereas the younger generation, men and women in that sample, and talking about the work-life balance, and a few other differences as well. But there was one similarity, one thing that was common to both groups. And that was at least one, usually more than one, significant failure. What Warren Bennis came to call a crucible, a real crisis, whether it was a meaningful loss or losing a job, being fired, one's identity being assaulted, loss of a person, some real serious crucible, a failure. That was common to both groups, and both groups saw that failure as a pivotal point, as a turning point in their lives, something that helped them become who they are today. Again, not saying it happened for the best, but they were able to make the best of that which happened. Now, most people experience crucibles throughout their lives, hardships, difficulties. The difference between the highly successful people, for example, the sample in Warren Bennis's book, and many other people, is that they're able to make the best of what happens. They see it as an opportunity, a learning experience, a stepping stone. The importance of failure for resilience, for well-being as well. So let me move on and define what we mean by perfectionism, because there are many definitions and we throw that word around constantly. But what do I actually mean by perfectionism? I define it as an incapacitating fear of failure that permeates our lives, especially those areas that we care about most. Note the word incapacitating. It is not just a fear of failure. Again, I don't know a person who is not afraid of failure, who is not embarrassed by it or feels frustrated by it. So that's natural, that's human, whether we like it or not. But an incapacitating fear of failure is a fear that is debilitating, that stops us, that prevents us from coping, from trying, from putting ourselves on the line. And the other part that I want to highlight in this definition is that especially those areas that we care about most. Now, I'm not a perfectionist when it comes to playing Monopoly. No, it's not that, I'm competitive, but it's not that important for me if I win or lose. But perfectionism was a central part of my life when it came to, as I mentioned earlier, squash, which was very meaningful to me, academics, which is very meaningful to me, and relationships, which was and is a very important part of my life. So in these areas, that's where I experienced perfectionism, and that's where I needed to do the work, and I'm still doing the work. It's in those areas. Let me elaborate on this definition. It is an approach, a cognitive and emotional schema that we hold toward the journey of our lives, toward the process of getting from point A to point B. The emphasis here is on journey. A person committed to excellence can still be as ambitious or more ambitious than a perfectionist. The difference between the two is just their approach toward the journey. Let me illustrate. So let's first take the perfectionist. The perfectionist is currently at point A, wants to get to point B. What's the perfect, most efficient path between 2 points? Straight line. This is the path, this is the cognitive and emotional schema that the perfectionist has when he or she looks at the journey, how they want to get from where they are now to where they want to get to. A person committed to excellence as ambitious as the person, the perfectionist, wants to get from point A to point B. No different here. What is different? The cognitive schema that relates to the journey. The person committed to excellence understands that while he improves, inevitably at some point he will fail. A perfectionist understands that sometimes she may not get the grade that she expected, but she will learn from it. A perfectionist understands that in relationships, there is no such thing as a perfect relationship, and therefore he sometimes makes a mistake, or she sometimes makes a mistake, but they continue and they learn from it, and the relationship gets stronger. And a perfectionist understands that he needs to fail time and again, 5 times, 10 times, sometimes 10,000 times, as we saw with Edison, until they get to point B. As ambitious, but the schema is very different. You have to draw many failed circles before you get to that ideal circle that Vincent drew last time. And the question now becomes, so which is realistic? Is it realistic to have that schema? Or is this one more realistic? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. There is no straight line toward success. There is no straight line toward a happy relationship. There is no straight line toward inventing the light bulb, or being good at psychology, or being a good parent, or a good friend. We make mistakes. And nature, to be commanded, must be obeyed. Pursuing excellence is about the constrained view of nature. Yes, I wish that I could get from point A to point B in this way. I wish it were so. I didn't enjoy failing my generals. I didn't enjoy falling down many times and losing in squash. I certainly don't enjoy having disagreements with my wife. However, I also would rather not have the law of gravity and be able to fly everywhere or float everywhere. This is a fantasy. And when we have this schema in our mind, we're putting ourselves, fighting nature. And just like we would lead an unhappy and frustrating life if we did not accept the law of gravity, we live, and so many people live, so many people at Harvard, not just at Harvard, everywhere, are frustrated constantly because in their minds they have this schema. And again, this does not mean that we enjoy failure. But when we have this schema, in addition to not enjoying failure, we have the frustration of not accepting reality. Now, there are consequences to having this schema. I want to discuss some of these consequences and some of the characteristics of a person who holds the schema. Now, there is no perfect perfectionist, as I said, and we all exist somewhere along the continuum. But there are many people, again, many people here who are closer to this end of the continuum. The characteristics that I'd like to share with you are all ones that are documented in literature. There are many people who have them. You will identify with some of the characteristics, not with others, and that's fine. All the characteristics, in addition to being well documented in the psychological literature, are also ones that I've experienced or still experience. So these ones are personally meaningful to me, in addition to being also quite common. The first one, defensiveness. In arguments, in discussions, perfectionists are defensive. Why? Because the criticism is by definition a deviation from the straight line. It's an imperfection, it's a dent. It's something that maybe I'm not doing perfectly well. And we don't like deviations from a schema that we have. Remember, the mind doesn't like when there is an inconsistency between what is inside and what is outside. We want there to be a balance, congruence. We don't like dissonance. And if what we have in mind is the perfectionist schema, then a criticism is a deviation from it. And then we become defensive. Again, something that I've experienced numerous times and something that I'm working on constantly. In addition, or in contrast, a person committed to excellence is open, is welcoming of suggestions and of criticism at times. Doesn't mean that he or she enjoys it, but he or she understands that it's necessary, that it's an important part of growth, of development. Perfectionist focuses on the half-empty part of the glass. Why? Because the perfectionist is obsessed by failure, obsessed by deviations from that straight and narrow. And whatever it is that we're obsessed with, by definition, is what we constantly focus on. So he or she is constantly focused on what is not working, on potential failures or actual failures. Person committed to excellence focuses on the half-full part of the glass. How? Because he or she enjoys getting to wherever he or she is going, but also learns to enjoy every step of the way, the journey. Even failure is an opportunity. A perfectionist overgeneralizes, catastrophizes. It's all or nothing. Either I'm perfect or I'm a failure. And we'll see the consequences in a minute of this all or nothing approach. Versus realistic. Again, realizing what reality looks like, what progress, in essence, looks like. For a perfectionist, there is no self-acceptance. A person committed to excellence, there is acceptance, first of all, of reality as comprising spirals rather than a straight line, acceptance of personal failure, and acceptance of the self as a whole. Perfectionist, there is one way, and that's the highway. It is static. There is no improvisation. There is no deviation. There is no trial and error. There is just one way, in contrast to having a much more dynamic, flexible process and journey, with much more spontaneity, which manifests itself, of course, in behaviors. A perfectionist is terrified of failure, terrified that failure from within, that he or she perceives themselves as failures, but also that others see him or her as a failure, keeping that facade, that image of impregnability, of perfection. Versus failure as feedback. Again, not enjoying failure. I haven't met a person who does enjoy failing, but seeing it more as feedback, as a growth opportunity. A perfectionist, it's all about getting here. That's what it's about. This is a means toward an end. Tangential, something that is not important other than taking me from here to here. Whereas for a person committed to excellence, the journey is as much part of success as the destination. Now, there are numerous consequences to this distinction, to holding one schema versus the other. Here are some of them. The first one is that a perfectionist experiences only, at best, temporary relief. So yes, there is constant pressure, but when he or she gets to point B, then they feel relieved. This is essentially the consummate rat racer. Let me give you an example of such a rat racer. The person, let's call him X, goes to school, goes to elementary school. Until that point, he really enjoyed his daycare, pre-K, kindergarten, but then he goes to school and the pressure begins. Because he begins to understand that he really needs to work very hard and do extremely well if he is to get into a good middle school. Because the middle school that his parents want him to go to is very competitive, very tough to get into. And he did get into a very good elementary school, but now he has to do the same for middle school. So the pressure mounts. And he doesn't really enjoy school. But then he experiences relief when the holidays come, and when they go on a family vacation, or when the exams end and he can play with his friends without thinking of the next test. He goes through school not really liking it, experiencing more a series of reliefs rather than passion and love of learning, which he did experience when he was in kindergarten, but no more. And then he gets into his dream middle school, the middle school that he was meant to go to all along. He makes it, and he feels wonderful and great and terrific for 2 weeks, because he now needs to start thinking about the high school of his dreams. Why? Because that high school is a feeder school for the top colleges in the country, and he really wants to get into one of those. So he really struggles and works hard in middle school, doesn't really enjoy his work, but he makes it and he gets into his dream high school, and he is ecstatic, happier than he'd ever been before, because here he is among the smartest kids in the country. Very difficult to get into the school, but he makes it. And there, he starts to learn, and he's happy for about a week, and then the pressure mounts because it is a very competitive school. And he has to join 2 varsity sports and 3 student organizations because he has to pad to build his resume so that he gets in to his dream college. And he struggles, and it's not fun, but he says to himself, this is just temporary. It's only pain now because later there will be gain once I get into my top college. And he applies, and on April 2nd, there is an envelope that arrives, and the envelope is large, and he opens it up, and he gets in. And he is ecstatic, happier even than he was when he got to his dream high school. And he says, now finally I can let go, now finally I can relax, because I'm already made. I'm in this top college, and I'm set for life. And he really enjoys the rest of senior year and the holiday. And then freshman week comes, and he is ecstatic, Mr. X. But then after that week, the pressure mounts again, because very soon there are midterms, and very soon there is competition, and everyone is working as hard as he did. And he has to work really hard because he wants to get his dream job. And then he gets his ideal internship during freshman summer. And the pressure continues. There are reliefs, there are fun periods, and these are periods when the exam is just over or when break is coming up, or during break. But then again, the pressure mounts. He doesn't really understand why he's not happy, because this was where he really wanted to be, really, really wanted to be, more than any other place. But he says, okay, once I get that job, then I'll be set. Why? Because that job will really get me into the top business school, will really differentiate me from all the other 1,600 students who will graduate with me. So he works hard, still builds his resume. He's a member of 3 student organizations, president of 2. JV in 2 sports and varsity in 1, plus taking 5 and sometimes 6 courses a semester. Why? Because it's tough, it's competitive, and it's the survival of the fittest, and no pain, no gain. Senior year finally comes, and there is pressure, but then he gets his job. He's happy. This is exactly what he wanted. This is exactly what he envisioned. And now he's happy. And then comes August 3rd, which is the date when he starts his actual work. And he goes to work, and everyone around him is a graduate of top universities, top places. He feels on top of the world. And he's happy for 2 weeks. Because after 2 weeks, he realizes there is a lot of pressure here, actually much more than there was in college. And he can't have time for those long leisurely dinners in the dining hall. He's working 80 to 90 hours a week and not really enjoying it, but he'll make it. He'll get there. He'll do well, get a good recommendation for business school. And then after business school, get his real dream job, and then he can enjoy himself. And he gets into his top business school choice. And then he gets his top job. And in his job, as an associate, he's really happy. In fact, he can't believe his good fortune. He's making a lot of money. Those student debts that looked so serious and overbearing only 3 years ago are now paid in an instant. He feels good. He has a nice apartment. And he becomes an associate, and he's ecstatic. He's happy. I finally made it. But a month goes by, and the knot returns. Because he's only an associate, he now really wants to make a partner. But once he's partner, once he gets the so-called tenure of the business world, then he'll be all set. And he works hard, he struggles, he doesn't really enjoy his work, but he says, just another push, a little bit more pain, and then the real gain. And after 5 years of pushing hard, he makes it. And he becomes a partner. In fact, one of the youngest partners in the history of the organization. And he's ecstatic, and he takes a long break and comes back after the break all motivated, because now he's an owner, part owner of this great, prestigious organization. And by now he has a family already, and he buys a huge house in one of the suburbs of the city, expensive, but he bought it easily. And he buys a luxury car. In fact, he has a driver by now, and he feels on top of the world. And he feels great for 3 months. And then the pressure returns, because he's only a junior partner. Can he make the senior partnership? Is it possible? Well, only if he really works hard, because few people make it that high up in the pyramid. It's getting tougher. But he'll make it. So he struggles and suffers, and it's not fun. But he makes it. No pain, no gain. And by this time, he's just bought another house in the Hamptons, just for the holidays, for the breaks. And there is another car, a bigger one, a faster one. And now he says, I can finally relax. And he does relax for 2.5 months. And then the pressure returns, because he's a senior partner, but there is only one managing director. Only one. And to get that would be really tough. But he's determined to do it. He's been a star until now. There is no reason to stop now. This is not fun for him. Doesn't spend that much time with people he loves, because he's constantly stressed and he has to prove himself. And for 7 long years, while there is material affluence, for those 7 years, there is time poverty, time famine. But he continues to struggle, and he makes it. The board makes an announcement. It's on the Wall Street Journal front page news. Mr. X is the new managing director of this incredible organization. And his friends congratulate him. He feels on top of the world. And he's happy. But then the stress returns. But then one day, he walks into his office, sits on his chair, puts his legs up on the table. He is, after all, the boss, the man. He looks back and sees Central Park, just beautiful there. He really is, not just metaphorically speaking, he really is on top of the world. And then there is a knock on the door. He's surprised by the knock because usually his secretary announces people. They don't just knock on his door. He is, after all, on top of the world. So he walks down, opens the door, and it's the chairman of the board. And she says hi to him. He says hi back. And she says, you know, record earnings this year. Well done. Fantastic. You have done amazing, amazing work. We're all so proud of you. So glad you're in your position. However, it's time to retire. You're 72 years old. This is the life of the rat racer, at best. And again, this is a caricature. I've highlighted just certain points. It's not as all or nothing. However, in essence, this is the life of the rat racer, about getting from point A to point B and then feeling relief for 2 weeks or a month. And then getting in that point B becomes point A. And again, like the rat, running around on and on and on. And you need to ask yourselves now, because if not now, then when? You need to ask yourselves now, what kind of life do I want for myself? I gave the example of business. It applies as much to any other domain, whether you are or want to become a medical doctor and going on and feeling pressure to get into the best schools, into the best department, the best internship, the highest position, and on, or whether you are working for a not-for-profit organization, or whether you're in academia or a lawyer, it doesn't matter. Just fill in the blank of Mr. X in which area. It applies to any place. And the question is, what kind of life do I want for myself? And remember, the most important thing, a person committed to excellence does not give up on being ambitious. However, a person committed to excellence does not also give up on the journey. And as we'll talk about soon, a person who is committed to excellence, not only does he or she not give up on the journey, or rather on the outcome, they actually reach higher levels of performance. But we'll get to that soon. A person committed to excellence is not just about temporary relief, but about lasting satisfaction. Yes, she has the ups and downs like we all do. However, also able to enjoy the journey, the day-to-day, the experience of being in college, the experience of having a lovely meal with my friends, the experience of reading and being exposed to great writers, to interesting classes, to nice extracurricular activities, appreciating it, not taking it for granted, not seeing it as just incidental, tangent, just something that I need to get through in order to get to where I really want to get to. Well, you may really want to get there, but where you really are is here and now, no other place. Now, I haven't met, maybe you have, but I haven't met the perfect person. I don't think that person exists. In other words, if there is no perfect person, for every person there is inevitable failure. And a perfectionist who is obsessed with failure just focuses on that. Whereas a person committed to excellence, there is possibility of success every step of the way, even in failure. A perfectionist very often wastes time, has to read every word, every, I has to be dotted, every T crossed. It's all or nothing. Either I hand in a perfect paper or I don't hand in a paper at all. Either it's a straight A or I'm a failure. All or nothing. And sometimes that's appropriate. And that's what a person committed to excellence does. Understand when, for example, if you're a surgeon, you want to have the perfect operation, and you don't want to say, well, it's okay if I'm 80% right about where exactly to cut. Yeah, there are places where you want the perfectionism. But in many other areas in our lives, it's not necessary, and it hurts us. A perfectionist is very often prone to disorders, and I mean disorders of numerous types, including, for example, eating disorders. So let me give you a personal example. So when I was playing squash, and when I was playing full-time, I had to really take care of my diet. Eat healthfully, eat well. But there was a problem, there was a real challenge in my life, and that challenge was my mother, who is the perfect cook. And her cakes are outstanding. So here is a common scenario that I encountered growing up. Tough childhood. I would come home after squash practice, open the fridge, starving, and there was a large piece of cake. Not the whole cake, but a quarter cake, very large, so inviting, so alluring, and I know from past experiences, so delicious. I look at it, and then I close the fridge because I can't have it. I'm in the middle of training for an important tournament. But 3 minutes later, I go to the fridge again, just to make sure it's still there. Why? Those of you who know my brother understand why. My brother is much bigger than I am, and he likes my mom's cooking no less than I do. So I was just making sure that it was still there, and it was. And then 10 minutes later, I had to go back because my brother had just disappeared from eyes for a few minutes, and I thought he went to the fridge. So I opened the fridge again, and it was still there. So I was relieved. And then, about 5 minutes later, I had to go back to the fridge. I opened the door, and 2 minutes later, there was no cake. All or nothing. Either I don't touch it, or I devour it. This is the schema that a perfectionist has. It's not, okay, let me have a slice of it. It's nothing or all. And this is the schema that perfectionists have. Either I'm a supermodel or I'm overweight. All or nothing. And that's destructive, and that hurts us so much on so many levels. As opposed to the healthy approach. Okay, so I'll have a slice. So I'll have a little bit. Okay, so I gained a couple of pounds. Big deal. I'm human. I'm not a machine. I'm not a Barbie. Or Ken. I caught myself there. Hurt self-esteem. Why? Because Nathaniel Branden, who writes about self-esteem, and we'll talk a lot about him in that lecture 3 weeks from now, the first pillar of self-esteem is self-acceptance. And remember, a perfectionist does not accept him or herself. Second, the reason why it hurts self-esteem, remember, there is constant, inevitable failure for a perfectionist because there is no perfect person. And if I constantly fail or constantly perceive myself as a failure, am I going to have high self-esteem? Of course not. It also hurts self-esteem because a perfectionist is less likely to try, less likely to put him or herself on the line. And the price that I pay for that when I don't try is lower levels of self-esteem. Remember, self-perception theory.